memory doesn't really go back that far. It's at least 100 years ago. I started out my life wanting to be a journalist, and I found that actually journalism is quite boring unless you really get to the top of the tree and then you start to write books. Whereas as a photographer, you have much more freedom, you can be independent, and you don't have to answer to anybody else. Although the truth is, as a freelance photographer, instead of answering to one person, you actually answer to 100 people because you work for different magazines, different companies, but it's very much preferable to be a photographer than to be a journalist, and being a photojournalist is a good compromise. Actually, as a photographer, I've been very lucky. I've met with really good people. When I joined Magnum, I was still quite young, and luckily there were great photographers working there at that time. I was living in Paris, and people like Henri Cartier-Bresson and Marc Ribou were working there. And in a way they acted as my mentor, if you like. So they also sort of, in many ways, developed my vision. I came there really just as a photographer. I knew the techniques, and I'd worked as a newspaper photographer in South Africa. But they really instilled in me the sort of visual aspect of photography. The shapes, the moment, everything like that. So I was pretty lucky to be involved with them. I was kind of interested in what was going on in the world, and photography has given me the opportunity to travel, to meet people, but still to be independent. And really, photography is freedom in a way. It's freedom to do what you want. It's freedom to develop your own vision. And it's freedom to see the world, to meet interesting people. Gosh, I think I've heard Henri Cartier-Bresson said, a good pair of boots. I think patience is kind of important, because patience and quick reactions. You either see something in a second, and or you see a situation, maybe an incredible building, and you want somebody interesting in the foreground. So you wait, and you wait, and you wait until there is a moment, and then 100th of a second, and it's done. Leica had been making M3s for a couple of years, and this was the camera that I wanted. But really I wanted an MP, but they had stopped making the MP. However, Leica at that time had a public relations guy, and a German-American called Bob Schwalberg, and he said, come to Wetzlar and I will convert an M3 to an MP for you, which is what I did. And I went there and I had what was essentially an MP. It said M3 on top, but it enabled me to use the winder underneath. And I got from him that camera and an M2 at the same time with 35 and 50 millimeter lenses. So I had my ideal cameras immediately. I've had a lot of interesting moments. I mean, you know, the shooting at Sharpeville in South Africa when 70 people were killed. I was there and I had the two Leicas with 35 and 50, of course film, and the film in my 50 was almost finished, so I just had the 35, and the police opened fire on people. At first I thought they were just shooting in the air or they were shooting blanks. Only when somebody dropped dead next to me did I realize that they were shooting real bullets. So that was the first time, I think, that I was shot at in my life. I've been shot at quite a bit since then, one way and another. And not just angry husbands, you understand, but in the Congo and so forth. Yeah, there are a lot of good moments, and the Leica has been pretty good, been very reliable for me. I know I've had friends, I had a friend once in the Congo from a Life magazine guy, and the battle was going on and he was sat on the curb with a screwdriver trying to repair his camera. But they don't need repairing, they just go on working, you know, which is pretty important for a photographer. Yeah, I've seen other photographers desperate because their cameras are broken down in the middle of Africa somewhere and they can't get them repaired. I never think about that. Again, luck. I was working in South Africa for the Sunday Times newspaper there, and I heard that this guy, Tom Hopkinson, who was a rather famous journalist who'd been editor of Picture Post. Picture Post is a magazine like Paris Match or Stern, and I heard that he was coming out to South Africa to edit this magazine for Africans called Drum, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn magazine photography rather than newspaper photography. And so I went and pestered him until he gave me a job, and that was a great education for me. But what was lucky was that when he had been at Picture Post, he had worked with people like Cartier-Bresson and Marc Ribot and Elliot Erwitt and people like that. And so he knew these people, and he introduced me to them, to Magnum. But the thing was, you had to meet Henri. And I, you know, being a rather stupid Brit, I went to meet Henri in the bistro underneath our then office, and I brought along my prints, and I thought, well, the French don't drink tea, and I'm a tea drinker, really. So I ordered a coffee, Henri ordered tea. No Frenchman at that time drank tea, but he ordered tea, and I showed him my prints, and he went, "Thank you very much," and he left. And I went up to the office and they said, "What have you done to him? He hates you." So, however, they told me that he didn't like to look at prints. What he really wanted was to look at contact sheets. And that was already a lesson for me, because I realized that looking at contact sheets, you can see how the photographer is thinking, how he's looking, how it's all developing. And so they arranged for me to meet him again. I went downstairs, met him in the bistro, I ordered tea, and showed him my contact prints, and I was in Magnum. That was it. And it was the start of I went from being the youngest photographer in Magnum, and now I'm actually the longest, I'm not actually the oldest, but the longest serving member of Magnum. Yep. So it's really all my life. It's life with a Leica, really. It's very simple. There are two ways for a photojournalist, apart from being somewhere where the action is happening, somewhere where things are happening. But, you know, I can look at a couple of pictures and I can see the different thing. There's a picture there of a couple of religious guys. One's pushing the other in a buggy. And I saw them going, and then I saw that they were going to pass this horse in the archer. Very simple, you just wait until they're in the right position. And the other thing, the other way is the picture up there, which you see a good situation and you realize you need somebody in the right place. And so you stand for half an hour and you have the camera preset and you just wait for the person to go into the right place and talk. So basically it's a case of quick reactions or patience, as we said before. But you've got to make a shape. You know, if it doesn't really make a shape, then it doesn't work. If you come to a country for the first time, your eye is fresh. You see everything, you know, you see the relationships, you have a new eye. Although I was born in England, I went abroad when I was young, and I came back and everything was fresh. And also an American, or actually a Swiss photographer, Robert Frank had done a book on the Americans. And it's quite difficult, I think. I mean, it's very easy to make people look foolish. It's very easy to mock people. But to try and get a more rounded look at a people, I think you have to do more. You have to try and get into different situations. You have to get into hospitals, into prisons, into schools, and really see what's there, see what sort of makes people. Well, that's easy to do in America because the society is more open than it is in England. For instance, it was very difficult for me to get into a hospital, but I really tried to do that. The only place at the time I couldn't get into was a prison. The Brits won't let you into photograph prisons. Well, in America you can, but I'm treading very carefully here because Robert Frank is a terrific photographer. But the Americans was more or less the result of one road trip. And I think maybe it was a bit unkind to the Americans. It showed a sort of jukebox America. So when I came to do the English, and at that time there were very few photographic books of art, I felt I had to be a little bit more expansive. I had to have a wider view. However, I understood his problem because I had a different problem. It was very difficult to photograph the upper class Brits unless there was a horse in the background because, you know, they're always on horses. So I understood Robert Frank's difficulties photographing the Americans. And it's also more difficult to shoot in a country where people are not on the street because it's raining all the time. So it's kind of slow. But I was lucky. Again, I got a grant from the Arts Council in Britain, the first time they'd given a photographer a grant. And so I was able to use the money from that grant to take the time to go around England and shoot. I'm reluctant to talk about the changes. When I was shooting these pictures, people were friendly. I had no time did I have anybody complain that I took their photograph. If they saw me, I mean, hopefully they don't see me, but if they saw me, and you smile and they would smile, and you know, or the English tend to pretend they haven't seen you because they don't want a confrontation. At that time, it was very easy to shoot in England. Now it's not so easy because I don't know whether it's the law or people have become more, what's the word? I can't think about it. But you know, in America, where everybody sues all the time, they're really litigious. Well, the English have become more litigious. And for instance, today I would not dream of photographing a child on the street in England, because almost certainly some woman who's 200 meters away will see it and will come rushing up and saying, "Why are you photographing this child?" It's very sad. I suppose, you know, everything changes, everything stays the same, but I was asked by a publisher to reshoot in England, the English, and I kind of thought about it. I really don't want to do this. I don't want the hassle, which is very sad, really. Well, Cartier-Bresson said to me once, we were walking out through Paris, and he said, "Look, if I take one good picture a year, that's it." And I kind of thought, you know, I was a kind of smart young guy, and I thought, I can take a good picture every week. But the truth is that he was right. You know, if you take one picture a year which really works, you're lucky. I mean, and usually that it's sort of down to a moment, just a gesture or a movement, or, I mean, the picture behind you, I saw these two, I was shooting for a German magazine, and I was trying to photograph a new part of London which was just developing, the new buildings, and I was trying to show how this development was affecting the old residents who've lived there. And I saw these two kids, and it was multiracial, and now London is very much a multiracial. There was one white kid, one black kid, and they had an ice cream, and they were playing, and there was a fence broken with new buildings behind, and I thought, this is going to work. You've got to be unobtrusive as a photographer, and I kind of stood there, and they didn't see me at all. And then the two kids behind, the little girl came, and I thought, this is going to work, maybe not. And then the little girl kind of pointed, and just that one gesture made the picture. I still think that in this world there is enough ignorance on one side of the world, and it's your job to try and show what that ignorance is to the people on the other side of the world. You know, I've been arrested in countries all over the world. It's one of the things that happens as a photographer. I've been imprisoned, you know, and sometimes it's not fun. But I think you've got to be honest, you've got to show how things are, and whatever country you go to, there's good and bad. There are always good and bad people, wherever. So I think there's still a role for the truth, for showing exactly what is happening. And so, you know, there's a role for the camera. I'm of the Cartier-Bresson school. As Henri said, look, we're not brain surgeons, we're hunters. You know, we're waiting for the thing all to fall together and you shoot it. I'm not really keen on, you know, people take 10 pictures and put them all together and make one picture and call it art. Well, in a way, it's technically, it's great, I mean, good for them, but it's not for me. I don't even crop my pictures. These are exactly how it was on the frame. If you miss, you miss. I think it's helpful. I mean, I can think of some photographers like Elliot Erwitt, for instance, who has a terrific sense of humour and sees things, you know, that I would not see. Certainly, it also helps. It helps you to get on with people you're photographing. You know, I think a smile and a joke goes a long way if you're, you know, doing a profile on somebody for a magazine. You know, if you're shooting for a cover of Newsweek, the ability to have a good, relaxed meeting with whoever you're photographing is useful. When I was young and growing up as a photographer, people like Eugene Smith, I think the book he did on Minamata in Japan, it seems to me to be the ultimate photojournalist book. What happened was that a factory in Japan was chucking out some sort of mercury or something into the water. And of course the people in the village were buying the fish that fishermen were catching. And they were having deformed children. And he started to photograph this, and he kept going back, and they kept going on chucking mercury into the water. And he went on doing it, and finally he produced this book, and it became a scandal. But then the last time he went, the thugs from the factory came and beat him up, which finally contributed to his death. He was so badly beaten. And that seems to me to be the ultimate sacrifice for a photojournalist. And so he was one of the people, apart of course from Cartier-Bresson, Marc Ribou, who were around me at the time. I've been shooting on a project for about 10 years. It's a project on water, and it's a very broad project because it's a bit expensive to shoot. I mean, I've been all around the world. I've been up and down the Yangtze, the Mekong, the Danube, the Mississippi, the Nile. So it's a long-term project, but it seems to me it's a worthwhile project, and it keeps me out of mischief. Sort of, gives me an excuse to go somewhere to have a look.